Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Growing Up in Scientology. We are talking today with Tyler Adams. Hi, Tyler.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for chatting with me today. All right, so anybody watching this video on my channel would almost certainly have seen you this week on Leah Remini's show. For any of them who did not see the episode, can you give us a quick rundown of what was discussed?
On the show, essentially what was discussed, because it was fairly topical in terms of everybody's involvement in essentially bringing in of income to the church and its various wings. So as far as the topic of my show, my portion, I did discuss some of the things that I was involved in at Bridge Publications, but that got edited out. And then realistically, my experience on the RPF where I lost my eye and had various other accidents and was still issued a freeloader's debt, which they disputed. It's like, wait, no, I may have tossed the bill, but I absolutely still have my fitness board turned down. And it's like step one, it's right there.
So that was the emphasis of the show, was the financial aspect. And again, I know there's people watching who are going to hear what you just said and go, what the fuck does that mean?
Yeah.
So like for the viewers, a freeloader debt is when a staff member or a Sea Org member, when a Sea Org member leaves the Sea Org, no matter how many years they've been in the Sea Org, 5, 25, 50 years, it doesn't matter. They're given a bill for what they owe Scientology for all of the free auditing and courses they did while they were in the Sea Org. Keep in mind, Sea Org members are working 100 hours a week. They're being paid about $50 a week if they're lucky. So Tyler, you were talking about how not only were you in the Sea Org for all these years, but you had these terrible accidents, including losing an eye. And then when you left, they still gave you the freeloader bill. How much was your freeloader bill that they gave you?
If memory serves, it was right around $40,000. I may have tossed the paperwork sometime back because that's not a bill I'm going to pay. So, I was not in a frame of mind of keeping a lot of documentation around.
And how many years had you been in the Sea Org?
A total of 6, 4 of which were spent in the RPF.
Wow. And so the Church of Scientology, after your show aired, came out and publicly denied ever having given you a freeloader's debt. And then I saw that you posted to Facebook a copy of your fitness board issue. A fitness board is, when someone needs to leave or they just finally want to get rid of somebody for whatever reason, they have this little tribunal and they find you unfit for the Sea Org. And then they put together a list of steps of what you need to do if you ever want to rejoin the Sea Org.
All of which cost you money.
Right.
Fun.
That's right. I was so thrilled when I saw that you had saved the issue. Literally step 1 of the things they tell him to do if he ever wants to rejoin the Sea Org. Step 1 is pay your freeloader's bill. And they say they never gave you one. I would like to discuss briefly how you got into Scientology. I mean, when you were born, your parents were already in Scientology, but kids who grew up in Scientology, depending on how their parents were involved and what their parents were doing, can all have potentially a much different experience in those formative years of their life. What was your family's Scientology scene when you were born and when you were growing up?
The first chunk, I would say, would be relatively normal in that, was born, growing up, I even went to a Presbyterian preschool, went to a kindergarten in a public school. I didn't get put into a Scientology school until I believe I was 9 or 10. So there was a shift from being relatively inactive and we read books, we take courses from time to time. I think my dad was OT3 at the time, was just sort of hanging out, it was just sort of, but I was born in 1978. And from what I understand, when they got into Scientology in the 70s, between when my sister and I were born, it was just a bit of a different situation. A lot of Scientology was sort of hey, get high without drugs. Being somewhat kind of former drug enthusiasts, they're yeah, I could give sobriety a kick. I don't think anybody who gets into Scientology and who has a weird family situation in Scientology, came from a particularly great family situation to begin with. So we're already 9 times out of 10 talking about damaged people kind of perpetuating their damaged goods a little bit. Not to trash on my parents a little bit, but they both kind of came from some traumatic upbringings. So there's some natural reactions to that. You know, there's rejection of like traditional religion and Christianity, which happened in both households to varying degrees. Coming into it, growing up, there's also this conflict, like, for example, with my dad and his mother over Christianity versus Scientology. So Mima, you know, she point blank said to me several times, you know, when I look at L. Ron Hubbard, I see the devil. You know, she just sort of very wholesome Presbyterian woman. A lot of funny stories about Mima. And you know, growing up, you know, she also insisted on taking me to church a couple times, going to like church functions. She was trying to save me in her way as well. And my dad was trying to save me in his way. You know, so there's already this tension in the family at different points. So there's weird things before I ever even get in the auditing, before, you know, it's really just like nerve assist, touch assist, contact assist, real like whatever, like blow off stuff that like, oh yeah, his eyes are a little bit brighter. He's a fucking infant, you know. It's like it's nonsense stuff. They make up what the end phenomena is supposed to be, and yeah, it reinforces that they're a good parent or whatever. You know, I'm really cynical, so I don't want to like completely shit on everything all out the gate.
Okay, so you said you were put into a Scientology school around what, 9 or 10 years old?
Yeah, I want to say right around in there.
And so where are we talking? Los Angeles?
Los Angeles area. I grew up in essentially what is Glendale. It's La Crescenta. My school story already illustrates that I was a weird kid before I had anything to do with Scientology. In first grade, this is how I retell it because, you know, perception's a little fuzzy, but nobody spoke to me. Nobody spoke to me directly. I had just changed to a different school, so I didn't have any friends in that class. I didn't like, the teacher was like completely absorbed in something else, and it was already like an overcrowded class. So being a fairly polite, self-sufficient, doesn't, you know, have too many issues kid, you know, like, I don't remember anybody ever talking to me. I mean, there's some other things there's like that happened out of the classroom where I was able to interact with other kids, but none of it was good, even with like kids that like lived down the street with me. So it was like this weird sort of thing where I'd gone from an environment, like a child social environment where I had other children in my peer group to play and interact with, and we were being engaged with in reasonably healthy ways, to oh, there's a train coming by, so there might be a...
Oh yeah, don't worry about it.
So where did I leave off?
The people not talking to you in the first grade.
Yeah.
And
yeah, exactly. So then my parents going, oh wow, you know, what the hell happened, putting me, because we had just moved, so I had to change schools within the same district. So that's why there was like this abrupt change, just because of a zip code change. And once they realized that, like, oh, my kid's fucked up, you know, because of whatever's going on there, they put me back into this other school. But I had to repeat the first grade. So now I'm like a year behind everybody that I used to know. So my dad, being a Scientologist, like, well, you got to catch up, you know, like bootstraps, baby. Like, do your homework. So, I mean, that's not all of it. He's actually a fairly wholesome individual. So he's not like, but you know, there's a lot of that kind of attitude. So by the time I want to say 8, 9, 10, right around in there, that's when some field staff members, FSMs, got a hold of my dad, you know, just sort of like, hey, recovering, I'm getting back on lines. Because, you know, he was like just sitting on OT3, just hanging out, working away, happy with his gains, you know, can't have that. You know, he had been off lines by, I think, like 9 years at that point. Still identifying as a Scientologist, but not doing anything really active. You know, my mom was the same way, you know, happy with what she had found and done with, kind of going on with life. And towards the end of their marriage, which I will say Scientology definitely was involved with, you know, she went back to school, became a school teacher. So as she was starting to, you know, really just forge a life that's different from what Scientology doctrine is. Yeah, there's some weird crossover in there, because she started working as a school teacher during like my middle school years. And I ended up going just the same school that she taught at for a brief year, and then going back to Delphi the next year.
it's interesting that you mentioned your mother being a teacher. As much as an emphasis on education that Scientology, well, seems to have to those who are in it, because Scientology puts such an emphasis on methods of study and how to learn properly. You almost never hear of Scientologists being teachers at public schools, because there's such a stigma in Scientology on the psychiatric influence at public schools.
Right. And not only that, but also for, in some cases, for you to get your certifications or accreditation anyway to begin teaching, you do have to take some of these basic psychology courses, and because you also have to be able to identify and report abuses, you know, when we've got really fucked up kids in there. But yeah, my mom, on her kind of gradual path out and away from Scientology, became a school teacher, worked in the public school system, ended up, I mean, she retired from working at a magnet school, really just on the same hill that I grew up on. You know, she still works as a substitute teacher. So for a brief time, yeah, there's this weird irony, because I went to all Scientology schools from basically middle school onward. And even then, the school that I did graduate from wasn't accredited. So
for those watching who don't know what an FSM is, you said you defined it as field staff member, which is a public Scientologist who makes a commission, makes money by taking Scientologists who have not done services in a while and basically giving them the pep talk to get back onto course or to get more auditing. And once you become someone's field staff member, which is they acknowledge that you are the one that pushed them to do their next step, they get 10% of everything you pay to Scientology.
In the 80s and 90s, there was a pretty reasonable ecosystem of salespeople that just lived off of getting referrals to Scientology, you know.
No, it's still huge, because for every single public Scientologist that there is, if no FSM has claimed them as a selectee, that's the relationship. You have an FSM and you have a selectee. If there's no FSM, the org just doesn't pay a commission. But the org can potentially pay a commission on every single public. So what these professional FSMs will linger and get to know every single person online who's taking a course or getting auditing at the org, and they will find out any single public who does not already have an FSM, and they'll just be their best buddy. Hey buddy, how you doing? How you doing? Hey, I'm gonna be your FSM. I'm gonna be your pet talker. Keep going. Good work if you can get it, huh? So that whole part, the age up until you were first put into a Scientology school. And a Scientology school, I think some of the people who just like, I've never been in Scientology, but watch it, they think the Church of Scientology runs schools, which we know they don't. They have an umbrella program called Applied Scholastics. And, you know, Scientologists will create these private schools. They're private schools. I don't even know if they're actually charter schools. They're private schools.
They've tried to get them as charter schools in California at one point, but they didn't bite. So they're all individual private schools that they try to build themselves as, oh, we're like a Catholic school. You don't have to be Catholic to go here, but, you know, this is our shtick. And so, like at Delphi, there was like this, you know, 4 or 5 siblings that were all Sikhs, and then like Delphi Boston, there was like this group of like local kids that were not Scientologists, that were just like from the neighborhood that the school was in, where it's like, okay, cool, where it's so there's like some little bit of weird intermixing, but those people are a super minority.
So you have these private schools, they end up paying 10 or 15% of their revenue to Applied Scholastics, which is really just a branch of the Church of Scientology. So we colloquially just call them Scientology schools. They're run by Scientologists. They use Scientology study technology. But why am I even getting off onto that tangent? Oh, until the point where you were put into that school. So let's say up until 10 years old. How big of a presence in your daily life was Scientology?
It was like getting some basic auditing, and I think doing like a learning how to learn course like came before being put in a Scientology school. So that happened a little bit earlier on. And then, like I said, there were assists that were administered, but also my dad was pretty dogmatic about the tone scale and certain things about that. So like, as an example, when my, nice, friendly Presbyterian grandmother would be like, oh, poor baby, when you're sick, he would get angry with her. He would be like, don't give my children sympathy. Like, for real. And she's like, are you, what the fuck is wrong with you? So but in her nice, polite way. But yeah, it's one of those things where, I mean, at a certain point, basically when the FSMs got in touch with my dad, he went a little hardcore. He decided to do lower conditions to the family because he hadn't like been teaching us with proper Scientology ideas and shit. So I don't know what those people told him, but essentially me taking some courses and going to Scientology schools was pretty much the immediate result after that, until I self-identified as a Scientologist, which happened in the process.
Can you give us an idea of what kind of auditing that you would have done as a child? Are we talking Dianetics auditing, some introductory Scientology auditing?
They started with some introductory Scientology auditing. As I remember it, like the real early stuff was like havingness processes, which made no sense to me at the time. I didn't understand what the hell that was until like years later. And then it was essentially, from a limited point of view, it's like, we're going to do this until you essentially improve in some way. So it's like, all right, well, I got to get cheerful about something, apparently. So, yeah, exactly. So, whether they meant to or not, I mean, I think auditing gets you high. If you buy into it, you can get high as balls. Whether you want to call it an altered state of consciousness or whatever that gets induced by whatever the hell happens, it tends to retcon a lot of things that happened before it. So, if there was something that they were kind of maybe critical of or beefy, like had a beef with, that was like kind of, maybe I'm going to start talking about this. Oh, wait, no, I got just blown the fuck out. And, that seems less important because that was so great. It was like, don't be so negative, man. Good vibes only.
Okay, so you mentioned havingness processing for those watching.
Yeah.
That could be as simple as just saying, look around here and find something you could have. And then the person says, the chair. And you go, thank you. Look around here and find something you could have. Oh, I could have the TV. Thank you. Look around here and find something you could have. And if that sounds silly, that's because it's a little silly. There's no special answer. It's just something, like you said, it's this repetitive thing. And as a child, I'm speaking for myself here, but I think it reflects what you just said. It's one of these things, as a child, you're doing it and you're kind of like, well, what the fuck am I supposed to do with this shit? And then at some point you realize that it will end if you become happier.
Yeah.
And so then you're like, well, I want this shit to end, so I'm going to be happy. And there's something to be said emotionally for, if you become happy, guess what? Now you're happy.
Right?
Okay, so just basic stuff. I think most kids raised in Scientology can identify with that.
Yeah.
Okay, and so then you go into the Scientology school. How do things change at that point?
The first one I went to was a bit kind of sketchy anyway. It wasn't a Delphi. It was called Basic Education Center, and very small school. That was another school year where instead of like nobody talking to me, most everybody was actively hostile to me. So
Really?
Yeah. Fucking assholes, man. Not to the one, but that first year there, I made friends with one other Scientologist, and he grew into being, we became like best friends over like our teenage years. And then the second year, because I wasn't the new kid anymore, all of a sudden I was all right to hang out with. And then I was only there for two years, but that was the weird social dynamic of the school. And my mom saved some paperwork from the time. So there's like correspondence she had with like the principal of that school, where basically I complained, like, these guys are picking on me, they're fucking dicks. None of this is like a good time necessarily. Essentially, I think if I remember the letter correctly, the principal wrote back, it's like, well, it sounds like your son took too long to report the matter, like, should have said something earlier, we don't fucking believe you now.
Do you remember who the principal was?
I'd have to go diving deep. And if I'm remembering correctly, she was actually declared a few years later for something else. She was like into like shady financial shit as well. So you steal from the wrong people, you get declared. So.
Did you meet anyone at those schools that you're still in touch with today?
There's a couple people that, like Joey Chade off the top of my head. I first met him at Delphi in LA, and then we were both at Lewis Carroll Academy. We graduated the same year. It was like, of the 4 people that were in that graduating class, me and Joey are 2 of them.
Anybody watching this video should watch the video I posted yesterday with Joey.
Yeah, Joey and I go way back. I'd do pretty much anything for Joey if he called. So, I mean, but yeah, there's a few other people that I've definitely reconnected with, and some people, actually quite a few, who don't necessarily want to talk about it, at least not publicly, because they're still like half in some ways, or they have to make the appearances of not being antagonistic. So there's this half-life being led. You know, I lived that half-life for 10 years.
I swear to God, I think half of the current active Scientologists are just people who are secretly out of Scientology, but are on the fence because they don't want to lose all their families.
Right. Yeah. There's still, 3 people in my family are definitely still true believers. My whole trying to leave that double life came to a head about 1.5 years ago when my aunt tried to go in, or went in for her OT preps, and wasn't even shown an SB declared, nothing. It was like, you have to disconnect from your nephew. I mean, she was upset. She made the choice, and it bugs me. I'm not happy about it. But long story short, 2 of my aunts, my uncle, and my dad, those 4 people in my family chose Scientology over having a dissident family member. But then again, those are the 4 people that are actively on services. You know, my dad's doing OT7. One of my aunts is on staff. My uncle volunteers a fair bit. And like I said, my other aunt wants to do her OT levels.
So that's kind of where push comes to shove, is when these Scientologists, who for their entire Scientology life have been dreaming of doing these OT levels, and then they show up to do them, and some fucking teenage piece of shit ethics officer says, you can't do your OT levels because your nephew is friends with bad people on Facebook. At that point, it might have been, you can't do your OT levels because you're still in touch with your nephew who's a bad person. And then your aunt, who if left alone would have just continued having a relationship with you, is put in a position by Scientology where they go, now's the time to choose. Do you want your eternal spiritual freedom or Tyler?
Or this fucking kid. Yeah.
It's fucked up, man. It's fucked up. I mean, look, you and I know a shitload of 2nd, 3rd generation Scientologists, and we know this is the exact scenario that happens constantly. We just heard of another one a few days ago where someone's mother shows up to start the OT levels. The mother's already paid up through OT5. So you're talking maybe 50 to 100 grand, depending on what her technical estimate was. And then she's told, I'm sorry, you can't do the OT levels because your daughter is not in good standing with the church. But if your daughter would just make it all right, you can start your OT levels. And in this case, the mother has not disconnected from the daughter, but what's happening, that's the moment where the ethics officer has now created a huge rift in the relationship.
Yeah.
It is only a matter of time before something breaks there.
Yeah.
Are any members of your immediate family still in touch with you?
That are Scientologists?
No, just your family.
Yeah, I'm in touch with my mom, my sister, all of my cousins. We were all raised to, like, I'm on the extreme end of the spectrum of how far in Scientology you could be raised within my family. They graduated from college. Yeah, they just weren't raised with the same mindsets in place. They're not going on course. I think one of my cousins who kind of thinks or identifies as a Scientologist, but really hasn't done anything more than basic stuff in Scientology, is like, yeah, this is like fine. I'm good. I'm married, got kids, moving on with life. Cool. That's what religion's for, as far as I'm concerned. Where it's like, okay, yeah, I got a couple of things that keeps me, like, helps me keep track of shit. Most of it's bullshit anyway. Okay, cool. I'm going to go do this life thing. That's what she did with it, and she's fine. So there's varying degrees of how far in and what took.
The members of your family who are still in touch with you, have they had to choose between you and the other family members who have disconnected from you, or are they able to talk to you and talk to the other guys?
As far as I know, they're allowed to talk to me and talk to the other guys. Yeah, it's a point of contention where it's like, why are you disconnecting from Tyler? What the hell? Because they weren't even shown an issue. They were just told he has to do his A to J steps. He knows why he was declared. Nobody fucking told me. So, I mean.
You say A to J, but I think you mean A to E, right?
A to E. Sorry, yeah. A to J is something else. But yeah.
Okay. And so for those watching, the A to E steps are what? A, B, C, D, E. 5 steps that anyone who is declared a suppressive person has to do in order to be undeclared and be back in the good graces of Scientology. Were you officially declared, or is it just one of these things where you've been told you were declared?
I was told that I was declared first by family, because people in my family were like, "Hey, we're gonna try and straighten this out, and challenge this because you got a raw deal and all this shit." So they're still like gonna fight this for a bit. It's like, all right, fine. I'll send some emails. I'll make some phone calls. It's no skin off my back to try and engage in a little bit of correspondence. It took me 3 months of calling and emailing and different shit and harassing some poor receptionist. Eventually, I got his post title as the Continental Justice Chief for the Western United States. Since Richard Valle, I think you know him. I remember when he did his EPF. We had a conversation, which was mostly me yelling at him for 2 hours, which was a little cathartic. But it took about an hour into it of me just sort of varying the question of, have I been declared a suppressive person or not? Like, just yes or no. And he took an hour of drawing that out.
Not to go off on a tangent. Did it ever strike you as odd that someone who is as much of a beta male as Richard Valle is in charge of all of the justice for the entire West U.S.?
It makes perfect sense because he will do exactly what he's told. He's got several hands up his ass. He's not just the local RTC rep's little puppet. Everybody gets a chance to speak through him, and he's never really gonna have, I don't want to rip on him too hard, but he's not too quick. He's not really quite with it, but he knows his doctrine in a way. So he can come up with a lot of pat answers, but he's not clever in his own right. He's perfect because he can go ahead and push out this unified front and not really be involved in it. None of his creativity is in it whatsoever.
It's true. I mean, in that sense, maybe that's what makes a perfect Continental Justice Chief. I mean, do you think Richard has ever raised his voice in his entire life?
He sounded like he was asserting himself fairly well, and I respect that at least. He never got so emotionally involved other than being dismissive. He really circled back around to just sort of varying degrees of dodging the question, gaslighting, or whatever. You talk about punchable faces, you talk about people that are easy to yell at. Because the whole thing is what, you're not going to show me my SP declared? Don't you know what your job is? I barely remember the fucking policy letters that cover your job, and this is an obvious one to me.
What was his eventual answer? Did he acknowledge that you had been declared?
About an hour in, yeah, he kind of eked out a, yes, you have been declared. And I said, what for? Because that's the obvious follow-up question. It's like, what did I do that you guys take issue with? Wouldn't answer it. Not a single thing. And that's the thing is, my family was also given a no answer. It's sort of like he may have joined a squirrel group or whatever. It's like, no. Because like I said, I've been seeing my family, visiting on holidays and birthdays and whatnot. Not all the time because, I'm weird and subject to, long periods of functional depression. But I was there for funerals, for New Year's, for all these different things. And it was pretty well understood that I had a bad time and we're just going to kind of move on. It wasn't addressed whether or not what I actually believed, because I never presented myself as hey, I had a bad time in Scientology. You all have to fucking quit. You just have to stop doing this because it's a fucking shit show. Because I already know what would happen if I did that. But it was no secret that I had a bad time and that I was not ever going to do anything in Scientology ever again. And I was going to do other shit. It's like, okay, cool. Do what you want. I wasn't going to be antagonistic. My opinions are mine. And I know I am prone to extremist and inflammatory opinions.
Taking a bit of a step back, and then we'll come forward pretty quickly. How fast did you travel this path of being put into a Scientology school? It sounds like that coincided with your dad getting back onto services pretty heavily. So how fast did you go the path of being put back into the school to eventually joining the Sea Org? And how old were you when you joined the Sea Org?
I was 18 when I joined the Sea Org, because it's a little bit interesting because it coincides in part with my mom's path out of Scientology. So going to Scientology schools for a few years. By the time I was 14, I was being Scientology recruiters would show up at or Sea Org recruiters would show up at these schools and recruit kids for staff. That's the way it was in, essentially the early to mid 90s. They were just used as recruiting pools because all of the staff members at that Scientology school, they're Scientology public in their own right. So if they tell a Sea Org member, no, you have to get off this campus, they're going to, like, that Sea Org member, all they need to do is call that person's ethics officer. From what I understand, that became a problem because on paper there's supposed to be a certain amount of separation. Recruiters would show up at like social functions. Like there would be a house party of fucking kids, most of us Scientologists, and we would be drinking. It's like so there's like this weird crossover at times. So I was recruited heavily from, I would say, 13, 14 onwards, and essentially after going through the Scientology school system, and then after my parents split, my dad moved to Boston. So I'd spend a year in Los Angeles and a year in Boston. And my dad going further and further into Scientology, essentially my job to keep my exchange in was to educate myself, which meant going to school, doing my homework, all these other things, and essentially educate myself in Scientology as well. This is the period where I did like my student hat, the first time through the PTSSP course, things like that. As a teenager, I was like 15, like M1, so I did a good number of courses as a Scientology public as a teenager. So while I became like a true believer, for lack of a better term, around 13, 14, I really like kind of put in the work of like covering a lot of material, or at least some early on, like, oh yeah, this is like the real beginnings of like you learning Scientology shit. And here's also kind of the funky family dynamic is the guy I call my dad, and I refer to my dad, is not my biological father. He is my older sister's biological father, but there was a hiccup in my parents' relationship, and I did not fully understand that he was not my dad until they got divorced. So this is one of those things where Scientology and Scientologists have this thing where it's like they structure things around identities. So the deal that I had with my dad is like after they got divorced was like, well, I'll go ahead and continue to play this role of your father in this life. So when my parents divorced, my mom had sole custody over me. My biological father was out of the picture and didn't have any kind of really any involvement in my life. As she was getting out and I was going deeper in through my teenage years, she was the one who had to sign off on whether or not I joined the Sea Org. So while I was, being recruited at 14, 15, 16, all through that, there were various times where it's like, hey, Mom, I want to join the Sea Org, because these guys wouldn't fucking leave us alone. And nobody can really tell these people to fuck off, except when it really comes down to it, there's like one person, which was my mom, who could say, no, he's got to finish school. He can do whatever he wants when he's 18. And that didn't really stop or slow anybody down. They just tried to call her into fucking ethics or whatever. It's like, why are you fucking... Why are you being like that?
So there were times before you were 18 that you wanted to join the Sea Org, but your mom wouldn't sign off.
Yeah, absolutely. Twice, two in particular that I can think of. Yeah.
At those times, was that kind of a rift between you and your mom, or were you kind of thankful that she was there to say no?
In retrospect, and at various times, at various times shortly thereafter, I was thankful that she was there to say no, but I never understood the gravity as to how or why or what her actual opinion was. I was always a PTS kid. I was a reckless kid that would ride their bike into garage doors. I would have accidents, things would happen, I would get sick. Normal fucking kid shit. And for some reason, it always came back around to like, nah, your mom's maybe not an SP herself, but she's probably PTS to something or other. She was scapegoated a lot. She saved some KRs that were written on her by various people at various times that show pretty clearly that from, I would say, at least 10, 12 onward, people are looking at my mom with this. She an SP? Is she PTS to something? Is she like type 3? Is she crazy? So they're looking at her with this critical eye and behaving in these skeptical ways towards her.
How did you finally come to join the Sea Org when you were 18?
So I graduated pretty much right around my 18th birthday. I didn't really have a solid relationship with most people in my family at that point for various reasons. And realistically, the options that I had in front of me in terms of like moving forward with something to do in life were join the Sea Org. I knew they would take me from, any time. They were actively recruiting me at the time and had been for like 6 months leading up to my 18th birthday. And I think there was one Scientologist, I forget exactly what kind of business he was in, but he kind of had given me an open-ended offer for a job. He was like, hey, you're good with your hands. If you need a job anytime, let me know. So I had that. I had one other kind of open-ended job offer at a place in Glendale where realistically I would be winding electromagnetic coils. And even then, I don't think that would have lasted all that long considering where the economy went and whatnot. So maybe some small-time factory work or you could join the Sea Org. And I hated school. I really, really, really disliked school. None of it was a particularly good time for me. Between like some kind of undiagnosed learning disability from elementary school, whatever the fuck was going on. So I wasn't going to like go to college or go to a junior college or even go to a trade school. That just wasn't gonna happen. There was just really no other options as far as like something that I could kind of sink my teeth into. It was a weird transitional time because there's all these adult expectations, real adult expectations kick in, not just being treated like you were a tiny adult. Now all the actual responsibilities kick in, and it's like, well, fuck. I don't have a lot of good options. I basically packed up my shit, left my mom a note, and fucking moved out. And for somebody, who for better or for worse has been on my side from day one, kind of a dick move. But then, I did my EPF in like 2 weeks. For your viewers, that's the introductory boot camp program. That program's supposed to take 2 weeks for your coursework and whatnot. Some of these kids were there for like 3 months because that's where the level of literacy was. Then I went to work at Bridge Publications, which is technically not part of the church proper.
You joined the Sea Org and went right to Bridge?
Yep. It was one of the recruiters was also like I had gone to school with him.
Brendan Faust?
Yes, he recruited me, but the other guy that was with him was Hans Brown, and I had gone to school with Hans.
Isn't it funny that so you have the Church of Scientology proper that's supposed to be doing like the most important mission in the history of the universe. And then you have Bridge Publications that is a book printer. And yet Bridge is a senior organization to all of the other churches of Scientology in Los Angeles. It's fucking weird.
Yeah. And that weirdness, that was never good. Because the only people that could really tell us to do shit were CMO. And even then, like CMO SUS at a certain point, we're like, we're not going to run programs on these guys for whatever reason. So then we ended up with some messengers coming over from IXW. And even that didn't fucking fly for some reason.
Because you're not supposed to be a Church of Scientology. How the fucking CMO be in there telling you what to do?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's like there was these weird hierarchy questions where it's like, and then there was a certain point where we weren't allowed to fraternize with the rest of the base at a certain point. So we could only hang out with people at Bridge for like whatever reason. It was just really fucked up. Between bouncing around schools, like I went back and forth between LA and Boston a lot and having my social groups disrupted a lot. And then, going right into an org that's kind of isolated. We don't really have a lot of day-to-day basis. But anybody who interacts with us has to kiss our ass for some reason. And they don't like that because they don't know what the fuck we do. We don't even know what the fuck we do. I spent my time at Bridge mostly collecting stock reports and collating information. And then, of course, it's just data. So I just throw it off all over the place. But then, like, different, like, salespeople and whatnot would get in, like, super deep shit. I didn't give a fuck. But that guy's all of a sudden, like, about to go to the RPF. It's like...
I've never understood. I've given this a lot of thought over the years, and I've never actually been able to figure out why they had such a strange inversion of organizations. And it's not just Bridge. I mean, it's one of the things that made being in the Sea Org in Los Angeles a fucking terrible place to be. Yeah. As opposed to Flag, where the organizational structure actually makes perfect sense. So at Flag, if you're in the Church of Scientology proper and your job is to, audit people or deliver courses, and you get busted down to a toilet bowl cleaner, at least it's an actual demotion. Whereas at Los Angeles, if you are an auditor and you get busted down to toilet bowl cleaner, technically you just got promoted to a higher organization.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, it's a complete fucking shit show.
Yeah, the estates org that takes care of the buildings is senior to the delivery orgs that actually deliver Scientology. And then the book publisher is senior to all of them.
And
Okay.
technically not ecclesiastically related. We were supposed to be getting paid minimum wage, California minimum wage for 40 hours. We're working 100 hours a week. Easy. You know what the schedule is. There's that. And here's the thing where it's like, yeah, I'm not supposed to be part of the church. But when I got busted at Bridge, I didn't get fired. I got sent to the fucking RPF. So now, for something I did at a private corporation, I got to do this spiritual fucking bleaching.
Yeah, no, that's where the Sea organization gets by and gets away with it. Technically, on paper, the Sea organization does not exist. Did you know that there is no company or group or corporation or membership group called the Sea organization? It doesn't exist.
Exactly. And so there's a lot of things on paper that say what's going on, but realistically, nobody gives a fuck. It's what this internal hierarchy is.
But okay, so the whole time that you spent on post in the Sea Org before you went to the RPF, was that whole time spent at Bridge?
Yeah.
Okay, so more or less 2 years on staff at Bridge, 4 years on the RPF, and then you left the Sea Org from the RPF. Is that correct?
Yep.
What got you assigned to the RPF?
This is one of those questions that almost never comes up, but in Scientology parlance, financial irregularities. And then what actually happened is convoluted and stupid because it has to do with an old accounting system, an old computer system, because in Scientology there's so many, like, there were, especially in the mid to late 90s, there were so many like weird legacy systems left over from the 70s. They didn't even start bringing in non-Linux systems or Unix-based systems until like 95, I think. So essentially a lot of old accounting records were still on this old machine from the mid 70s. So part of it was reconciling those records with information that was in the current system. So it's like this weird, it's not even really forensic accounting. It's basically finding money that's on account. Money's already spent. It's not in a bank account. It's just on paper somewhere that exists. And then getting that person to agree to donate that money that's on account to a library donation project. This was part of a sales project. That little piece of Scientology history was being billed as financing the Battlefield Earth movie. So it was actually a project of 3 people, myself and 2 or 3 salespeople. And I was generally like kind of the sales admin, but they really managed all their appointments and whatnot. So what I ended up doing was just sort of this sort of deep dive paperwork of finding stuff, calling the guy and saying, hey, you have X amount of dollars on account for this. A lot of these people, old phone numbers, very unreachable. But then, so it became this thing of like, okay, just sort of sleuthing as best I could, trying to find information. But then also at the same time, there's all this, find the money, get the consent, and fucking get it debited, get the books shipped. So there was stuff where it's like, okay, this person doesn't fucking exist anymore. I was like, fuck it, get it out of here. Otherwise, it's still money in this old accounting system. But none of this exists. None of this even, I'm not even convinced that the current books reflect anything about that. So some of these people, upon hearing through the grapevine that they're being contacted about money on account, then call back and go, oh, wait, I want a refund. So then because it came through on a refund thing, they hung me out to dry for, what amounts to $10,000 of illegal donations or whatever it was. I didn't profit from it. I shipped books to libraries because I thought that's what we were here to fucking do. So,
so let me ask you a question. Let me jump in here with a question. Because I know how this whole book account thing works at the org level. I'm less certain about how it works at the Bridge Publications level. When you say money on account with Bridge specifically or on account at the Church of Scientology?
At Bridge specifically, because pubs, orgs in general, they always maintain their own line of direct sales.
So let's say you have Joe Blow has $5,000 on account at Bridge, and you're doing this project, and that money was spent years ago. This money is just a number on a paper. The money does not exist. And
Right.
you call this guy up and say, hey, well, are you okay with donating this $5,000 to a library package? And he says, yes. You debit his account to zero. You zeroed out the account and you shipped books.
Yeah, that's all
You're
it is.
basically just getting rid of a liability on a balance sheet.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, that's all it was.
I see. So then some guy calls up and is like, hey, I got a phone call. I have $5,000 on account. I want that money back. And then someone else is like, you don't have that money. We already used it. And he's like, well, I didn't authorize that. And then they're like, Tyler, what the fuck did you do?
And I don't even think it even went down like that. I think the guy who called wanting a refund was just wanting a refund. Like, I didn't know I had fucking $5,000 on account. I want it now because fuck you guys. That was what happened. And then it was, there's a couple things here and there where I'm not sure if like the person even fucking exists anymore. There was one in particular where like none of the account information made sense. There were numbers and letters missing. It was just fucking there, right? So, and like I said, that only amounted to $10,000 retail. That's a small amount with how they inflate the prices of those books.
When they say $10,000, they're talking about full retail price for the books.
Yo, yeah.
Oh yeah, it didn't even cost them $500 to make those books.
Not even close.
No.
So yeah.
And you end up doing 4 fucking years of hard labor on the fucking RPF. No vacations, no family, no relationship, no nothing over a little fucking error that anywhere else would be a little slap on the wrist, maybe a warning.
Yeah. I mean, and anywhere else, this accounting problem wouldn't even fucking exist because when everything moved over to the new system, all of that would have been zeroed out and you would have unplugged the fucking machine because it was a dinosaur. So you would have sold you and you would be dealing with accurate books.
It's comical, especially I know to people outside of this Scientology bubble. If they truly understood how convoluted and backwards and infantile these computerized systems, these finance systems, these management systems are. It's amazing the Church of Scientology manages to carry on as a functioning or a going concern. Now, in many respects, they're not a going concern, but you know what I mean. Right. It's amazing they're able to move this along the road. I mean, I think that's why these things like the IAS and the Ideal Org program have really been the focus, because if the Church of Scientology was only having to rely on the business of the Church of Scientology to feed itself, it wouldn't even be able to. No. They had to switch their whole business model from selling and delivering Scientology to selling nothing.
Right. Selling imaginary buildings.
To be fair, the buildings aren't imaginary.
No, they're not.
No, but you're right. And again, this gets into a little bit of the weeds because most people won't know what the fuck we're talking about. But yes, let's take Boston. Once the public Scientologists of Boston donate everything plus the shirts off their back to buy this new building, the Church of Scientology of Boston does not own that fucking building. That building is owned by Sea Org Reserves, by International Management, and even though the public Scientologists have pooled their money to buy this building, the Church of Scientology of Boston still has to pay rent to Church of Scientology International to occupy that building. They have not done their local Church of Scientology any favors.
None.
In fact, all they've done is increase the utilities costs.
Mm-hmm.
I do not believe, Tyler, that even public Scientologists understand that when their org buys their building, they're still paying rent on that fucking building.
Yeah, I didn't understand it until years after getting out, where it was like, oh, that's what the fucking connection is. Because
this is a funny question, but work with me on this. This is a little strange. My whole life in Scientology, my professional staff and Sea Org life, was always involved in delivering Dianetics and Scientology. You're dealing with people. You're dealing with people's emotions. You're dealing with their problems. You are able to either succeed or fail based on how well the person in front of you is doing and responding to what you're doing to them. Right. And I guess in my mind, that's the experience of a Sea Org member. That's what it means to be a Sea Org member. When your Sea Org career is dealing with books, did you feel like, yes, I am a Sea Org member. This is what the Sea Org is. This is what we do. We're clearing the planet. We're getting Dianetic. We're expanding Dianetics and Scientology. did you feel like you were playing an important part of the game as a bridge staff member?
To a certain extent, yes, because at the time that I was there, Bridge was on a little bit of an upswing. At times when it was on the upswing and whatnot, where it wasn't so fucking miserable, and I had a handle on what was expected of me, and I didn't have somebody yelling at me every single fucking day. So that 1 week, I felt okay about it. I mean, just to really draw it to, I mean, I made some okay friends at the time. So a lot of the time you're really there more in it with the people that you're with to a certain extent. And then it's the different levels of buy-in essentially. So
totally. I think relationships and the strength of some of the relationships that you can create in the Sea Org is what makes it such a sticky thing.
Yeah.
It's not just like they're your coworkers, and people hate it when I compare the experience to the military, because people, the military is an honorable and patriotic thing, and people look at the Sea Org as just a cult. But there's something to be said for the mindset, right? Like when you're in the foxhole, all you give a shit about is the person to your left and to your right.
Well, it's funny because like one of my friends that I've made more recently, he was in the Army. He was in artillery. He served in Afghanistan and Iraq, and we would compare. And he's also been to legit prison. Like, so we compared stories in terms of not so much like the violence or the comparative violence that we faced, because he survived explosions where his friends didn't. But then, so we were able to deal with certain things and have like sort of compare things. And he definitely agreed that the bond seems like the bond is very similar, because he gets the same sort of fraternity, brotherhood, camaraderie when he goes and hangs out with just people that have been in, just people that like can relate to the experience. And so, shout out to Greg. He and I were able to bond over sort of the bullshit aspects of, because there are bullshit aspects of the military, even if even if you're there for overarching good purposes, there's still bullshit authoritarian games that people try to play and whatnot. And there's varying freedoms. There's more freedom to push back against that in the military proper, but in the fucking Space Navy, we had way less ability to push back at that. So I mean,
Space Force.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where so there's comparatives in terms of mind games, in terms of constructing a certain type of environment, and also in terms of being in a situation where everybody has a certain amount of buy-in, so everybody's kind of on the same page, and one hand can work with the other in those closer quarters. Broader organization, that's where it falls apart, but in terms of the individual experience, I think it's a fair comparison, even if the organizations, they're different, but the cult was in part modeled off of a military structure for a fucking reason.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you wind up on the RPF. Now, it's, I think, fair to say that the RPF is the worst of the worst as far as Sea Org experiences. By and large, that's going to be true. And again, this changes over the generations. Like, you talk to Mike Rinder about being on the RPF, and he'll go, well, to be perfectly honest, that was some of the most fun I had in the Sea Org. But that's because Mike's day-to-day life on his post was so much shittier that the small amount of time he was on the RPF was like a fucking vacation for him. It's a little, but he also never spent years on the RPF. He might have spent, a few months on the RPF. What was your RPF experience like?
I went to the RPF in 1998, and I didn't get out until 2002. So there's a 4-year kind of chunk there. 9/11 happened during that chunk. So in terms of like relating to people that were out, I can kind of cover some of those grounds. But I think the thing to kind of point out, like when I got busted and was sent to the RPF, I went under protest. It was basically, I was given my RPF assignment by a CMO messenger who was on mission at Bridge to straighten things up. So there were a few of us. I was just on the leading edge of that fucking gravy train. When I was given my issue, I'm not sure what my exact words are. I did cry. I said, "This is bullshit. but I'll go, because I knew that I was in such a place where if I fucking kicked too much, I was probably going to get declared. You know, I had already been rubbing a lot of people the wrong way. I day one, fucking show up on the RPF, yeah, get all my shit and whatnot. You got to pack up all your shit, put it in storage. There's no radios, no books, not even fucking LRH science fiction books. And I was like, coming from like, I was the book guy. I actually liked Hubbard's science fiction for a time growing up with it. You know, I read Mission Earth when I was like 12. Final Blackout, pretty okay book. You know, fucking Fear, pretty solid book. If you wanted to like get into some of his fiction, the RPF flag orders at the time explicitly stated, you know, there's no luxury items of any kind. So no musical instruments, no books, no radios, none of this, no, like nothing you could fucking enjoy yourself with.
It might sound like an exaggeration sometimes if people compare prison to the RPF, but in prison, you're allowed to fucking read books.
Yeah. I mean, it could, yes, yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. In terms of like the relative harshness of the Sea Org to the real world, there's elements of the Sea Org which are way the fuck over the line.
You're not allowed to read a novel. You're not allowed to read. And the guiding principle there is you're not allowed to do anything that might actually bring you enjoyment.
That's part of it, and you have to be solely focused on rehabilitating yourself because you're so irredeemable at that point. You know, the whole premise of the rehabilitation project force is that there is something wrong with you that needs to be fixed. You know, I mean, right at the beginning, it's not to get into all the rhetoric, but this is all where you send all the evil pieces of shit and all the motherfuckers who can't fucking get up in the morning and do their job, and all the fuckers who just make problems for everybody else. That's the opening paragraph of the RPF flag orders in a nutshell. You're here because you fucking suck. And everything else that happens is predicated on that. And the only way to not suck is to do the fucking program. But I'm there under protest. I say, no, this whole thing is bullshit. This is like, I'm here because this is where you guys are sending me, but I don't want to fucking get declared, and I'm not done with this whole fucking Sea Org business, even though we're having a beef. So I request the various justice actions. The first one took a year. Yeah, Board of Review. The first one took a year to like convene and do anything. And I was under watch for that entire year. I did not go anywhere or do anything without somebody else fucking glued to my hip. That was my first year on the RPF. I think that's when somebody had the bright idea of like, all right, well, we got to make sure that he gets some auditing, you know, because like they had tried twinning me with, you know, I've explained that your twin is your brainwashing buddy. That's the person you're supposed to make better since you're all irredeemable fuck-ups. I went through, I want to say, a total of 6 or 7 brainwashing buddies, and 2 of them probably in that first year.
Was there anyone who you were on the RPF with at that time who is now out of Scientology that you're in touch with now?
Yeah, actually a few. Like Nora Ames, I actually knew her before we were both in the Sea Org, but she was on the RPF. She showed up to the RPF actually shortly after I lost my eye. So she was there at the time. Her ex-husband Cameron was also showed up at the same time. A couple people that don't want their names mentioned. Sorry, anybody who was on the RPF at the same time, maybe still in Scientology, you're about to get a sec check. But yeah, a few. There's definitely a handful of people that I'm in touch with that are either out to varying degrees.
How many other Sea Org members would you estimate were on the RPF at that time?
Between 150 and 200. I think the RPF, the PAC RPF at that time ranged between 150 and 250 people at any given time.
That's like 20% of the entire fucking base.
Yep. Yeah.
It's unreal.
Yeah.
When you were on the RPF, can you recall, like, of all the people that were currently there, what's the longest any of them had already been on the RPF?
So I'm not going to say this person's name because they, as far as I know, they're still a Scientologist and whatnot. So this is part of what makes it really fucking mind-blowing. But there was somebody there who was sent to the RPF when they were 13. Yeah, they were in a full-blown, basically gulag with other adults at 13. And by the time I had been there, their total time on the RPF was like 9 years, and they routed out from the RPF. So
and so they left after 9 years. They were like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, didn't even finish. Now, this person, like, I'm just like keeping them anonymous and whatnot. That this person also like ended up having their RPF assignment canceled afterwards and whatnot, and they're still a public Scientologist for all intents and purposes.
I know everyone watching this video won't already have seen other videos about the RPF, but guys, we are talking no less than 5 hours hard labor every day. The other 5 hours are supposed to be spent doing Scientology courses and auditing, but it's usually oftentimes just 10 hours of hard labor.
14-hour days were not uncommon.
Right. So, you're getting paid $25 a week if you're lucky. You are not allowed to have any days off. Christmas doesn't exist. Birthdays don't exist. There are no holidays. There are no vacations. You are not allowed phone calls. You are not allowed to speak to Sea Org members unless spoken to. You're supposed to run everywhere. If you're married, you're not allowed to see or talk to your spouse. There's no family time. There's no nothing. I mean, there is nothing in modern American society, in our justice system, that compares to the level of depravity an RPF member has to experience, except maybe being held in solitary confinement at a supermax prison for the same period of time. I mean, would you agree with that?
I say it's up there. It's a form of gulag. It's a work camp situation. Now, instead of machine guns, we employ weird surveillance and brainwashing tactics on each other. So there is different levels of duress, but the malice and the results are all the same. I mean, it's a place to send people that are being problematic for whatever reason. There was a period of time where people just routed out from the RPF, where you showed up, and that's where you routed out from for certain people. There was an influx of people that came down from INT, that essentially that was their route. Essentially anybody who was assigned to the RPF who was like, no, fuck this, still had to route out of the Sea Org via the RPF. You know, none of that changed. You know, it was like, well, we're going to do your RPF routing form, and then we're going to route you out of the fucking Sea Org. But in terms of, the schedule that you keep, what's expected of you, and what you're there to do, I mean, it's different in different Sea Org bases that have an RPF. But at the PAC RPF, we were a construction unit. We were there to do electrical, plumbing, fucking HVAC, concrete. We technically weren't allowed to use any heavy machinery, so we weren't, operating the bulldozer. Those were actual Sea Org crew. That didn't stop Sea Org crew from handing us like a tool belt and screw guns and whatnot. It's like, yeah, go wire the fucking building. During the time that I was there, we also had to pass building inspections every time, for a lot of these things. Paul Burkhart's plans were very readable. We worked with a lot of those. So, I mean, I did mostly electrical work at the time, mostly wiring and some fire alarm systems. And there's some stuff in there where it's like, I don't have any real training in this. I'm just going off of what everybody tells me and a little bit of a knack for the work, apparently.
So on a construction crew, I have some familiarity with this. I'm curious if you have any insight on how the church gets around this. My understanding is that whatever the scope of work is, it has to be supervised by the person holding the license, the GC license or whatever, and the commercial license, whatever it is. Right. But the workers on the site these days are supposed to have some sort of an employment ID card to prove that they actually work for the company that's owned and supervised by the GC. Right. And the inspectors can come and shut a whole job site down and levy big fines. How does the church manage to have totally unexperienced, unlicensed RPFers working on construction crews doing electrical and God knows what else?
Yeah, you're right. But also the inspection schedule, it's known in advance. When you start the job, there's very, very few inspectors that are just gonna fucking show up because they show up. I think I had one inspector who showed up, and this is in the real world, who showed up to help to like look at the job site and whatnot. And he came by. He could have looked at any of our documentation. He said, yeah, when I saw these permits come through the office, this was going to be a problem. One guy out of hundreds of job sites, as far as inspectors that bothered to go out and do something other than the routine inspection work for that job site. So the way the Church of Scientology gets around it is, yeah, they have a couple of Scientologists, general contractors or people on staff in the Sea Org who hold, who have the stamp, basically, whether they be an engineer or a contractor or whatever the case may be. And when the inspectors come by, the RPF's not around. We get a preliminary inspection from the Pac Renos guys, but even like Jack Krushko was not the electrical inspector, even though he's completely fucking anal about everything that we possibly did and would hang any of us out to dry if any of it was slightly wrong from his point of view. So so for the most part, for the RPF inspections, we're just not around. We're not there to be seen. So either we don't show up to the job site that day or we're on a different floor. But here's the thing about being in the Sea Org is everybody likes to gossip a little bit. So you'd have like people like the guy who was running electrical, who was, kind of a fucking sexual predator, but he loved to gossip. So he would kind of give a vague idea that, they would just bullshit with the inspector the whole time. Whatever the fucking inspector was into, they were into, and they were just kind of best buds and walk through and just sort of go through everything. And because we were so anal about certain things that, it's journeyman level work. It's not like we were like producing shit that was falling apart. We were held to a pretty solid standard of what was expected of us. And it was recognized as journeyman level work by the inspectors.
So as far as you know, the inspectors had no concept whatsoever that there was an RPF or a group of these unlicensed, unprofessional workers that are actually doing the work. They had no idea.
No, they thought that, the guy that they were talking to is like, yeah, I sent my crew home early or whatever. So it's never a big enough red flag to anybody who's on the property, just looks normal.
So when we first started talking about the RPF, I had said, just however you want to communicate it, what was your RPF experience like? And then I got us off on a tangent as soon as you said you guys weren't even allowed to fucking read books. But I got us off on a tangent right at that point. What are some of the most important things you would want to say about what your RPF experience was like?
It's continued thought reform and behavioral conditioning, not only through the auditing that's done and the sort of the inspection that you're subjected to. You hear about sec checking, and then there's FPRD style sec checking, and then there's also the truth rundown and rollback interviews, the how to handle black propaganda and whatnot. So there's different layers of it in terms of trying to get you to think differently. And I think Chris Shelton has touched upon like the sec checking and FPRD aspect of it, where you can get to a point where you've legitimately said everything you possibly could say. You're pretty well in touch with your dark side. You kind of, you not quite snap out of it, but you separate out from this idea that you have anything else to be persecuted for. That in itself, I think, also is traumatic, to be kind of pushed out into that headspace through what amounts to being hours and hours of interrogation that usually goes to past lives. Essentially, you have to make shit up, and most of that is in a non-real context. It's still like, for some of us, it's still bouncing around up there. So to be pushed out of the headspace that you have all this stuff, but you have nothing to confess about it, that's its own kind of psychological trauma.
In one of these auditing sessions, you could go from starting out answering a question about, have you lied to someone, lied to another Sea Org member, and you could wind up talking about wiping out civilizations on other planets 1 billion years ago, right?
Yeah, for sure. And that might not even be the thing that actually does it for you. You got it, like, everything's on the table. It's a lot of it's predicated on the idea that you can just remember shit. I wanted to hit one other point about the truth rundown and rollback interviews. Part of the process of the thought reform, much beyond all the sec checking and essentially what amounts to weird thought experiments about theoretical non-existence that before Earth shit. There's, how to handle lies, black propaganda, things like that, because the way Hubbard lays it out in those issues is like black propaganda is a virus kind of thing that you have to kind of track from one person to the next. So when somebody comes up with, spouting these critical or whatever things, you do these rollback interviews to investigate, where the idea came from. Between rollbacks and the truth rundown, it's a very invasive and very snitch-oriented interrogation method that further turns the group inward on itself. Combined with everybody eventually having to do lower conditions and have to show how they fucking fought against the evil of some other person's aberrations. So there's incentives all throughout the line, whether you're just being the guy conducting interviews, you have every incentive to find fucking dirt on this, because that's going to count for you later. And same thing with the truth rundown. It almost gets convoluted enough to be believable, especially when you're deep in it. But it is I think a significant form of group thought reform. The RPF as a whole wasn't subjected to group-wide rollback interviews all the time or anything, but it was one of those things where that was always gonna, was a possibility that was happening, because that's one of the things that you got to do in addition to addressing all 8 dynamics with the false purpose rundown and getting rid of all of your evil purposes about everything. You also have to have a firm orientation into what's considered truth and appropriate in Scientological terms.
Right. So my only exposure to rollback interviews was at ASHO, and we'd have some new MAA who had been trained in the confidential rollback technology. I could never figure out why this shit was confidential. It was so stupid and basic. And what I would see, this was so hilarious, because to a newbie like me who'd never been exposed to rollback interviews, it was so obvious to me that SEERG members were just rolling back to people they didn't like and wanted to get in trouble.
Exactly. Oh, for sure. It's it's not, you're not getting anything good. You're just getting people to snitch on each other.
Yeah. And so just the nutshell description is rollback. It gets into the realm of not policing actions, but policing ideas. If something you say to someone gives the ethics officer the impression that you have a negative idea about someone or something that you're not supposed to have a negative idea about, the interview is basically asking where you got that idea from. And if I'm dumbing it down, just jump in and correct me. And so SEERG members would just basically be like, Jim Plett really hated Huck Taylor in the BC area, and Jim would just roll back everything to Huck.
Fuck that guy.
Oh yeah, and they would roll back to each other. Huck would say he got everything from Jim, and Jim would say he got everything from Huck.
And I think that's a classic example of how it's never going to work as it's billed to work. It does something for sure. It definitely gets weird, but all that's really happening is you're stirring up drama between two people who don't actually fucking like each other, but have to live every minute next to each other.
So did they do that on the RPF? Were people just rolling back to their arch enemies?
Oh yeah. There's definitely one guy who, he would just fucking roll it back to fucking everybody who was around, so because he was just that sort of, no, fucking everybody said this. It's just sort of like you couldn't even fucking narrow it down to anybody. And then there's other people who just came up a lot because they were disliked, or they were legitimately or not, where it's like, oh yeah, that's the fucking guy. At the same time, during my time there, nobody got hung out to dry from their rollback interviews as hard as they got, hung out to dry for the big drama was out too deep, which is basically two, people fucking on the RPF at all, which happened not a lot, not as lot as that I think would have been healthy for the participants, but it just happened in such loud ways where there's this one couple who just sort of had been boning each other for a year and a half on the RPF. They figured out sort of how their paths would cross right so they could knock one out a couple times a day. And it's just sort of
it's funny to my time in the Sea Org, I guess I was a little more innocent and naive. It's always been funny for me to hear stories from people who are on the RPF where, as you've already described, you're already being told you're the biggest piece of shit in the world. You already know this is your last chance not to be declared. You're already doing hard fucking labor for years. And then to hear that with all of that external pressure being put upon one, that they'd still be like, let's fuck.
Mhm.
It blows
Yeah.
my mind. I mean, in retrospect, it doesn't quite blow my mind, but
I think it goes to like how our stress responses are. Like with the couple people where it's like their stress, that's their stress response. And it's also you're taking a huge risk. Like being gay in Scientology, trying to be sexually active on the RPF is taking a huge risk. You will get sold out for thinking it. Like I had like perfectly legitimate platonic relationships with other people on the RPF, that then people would like, no, those two are fucking. I was like, no, like I actually legit like this. They're just my person, you know. I was like, so
I've seen a response to some videos where we're having conversations and people are talking about getting in a lot of trouble, and
yeah.
people go, what does getting in a lot of trouble mean in Scientology? So let's take the RPF. You said, being sexually active in the RPF, you're taking a huge risk. So what does that mean? You get caught. Okay. What are the consequences?
Right off the bat, if you get caught, you will be, what few privileges you would have had. I have to work like 10-hour days no, it's 14-hour days, and I have like no personal enhancement time necessarily. So you get sent to the RPF's RPF, essentially, right off the bat, if you get caught with something like that. I was the MAA for the RPF's RPF a couple of times. So we would also cordon those people off entirely. They only dealt with certain people one-on-one. First thing right off the bat is complete isolation. You're already on the RPF where you're isolated from society and the Sea Org as a whole. And then you get thrown in onto the RSR where you're isolated from the RPF to the same degree as you were previously isolated to the Sea Org. So you cannot speak to other members of the RPF unless spoken to, right? So it's a further level of isolation. And then for the people who are super suppressive because they got their bone on, they were isolated, usually even a layer even further, where there was like one or two people that were even allowed to speak to them.
No pay at all at that point?
We're all already busted down to $12.50 a week. That's what we buy soap with, soap and cigarettes. So I think that's the main thing is you can't pick up your pay at the same time as anybody else. So that level of isolation means that, things have to change hands weird. And you then have to also ask for special exceptions and shit because of your low status.
Right. So it really is, in some respects, a psychological penalty.
Yes.
I mean, you're not going to be physically beaten as a penalty. You're already being isolated. You get doubly isolated.
Right.
No enhancement time. And again, to outsiders, I know they don't consider being able to do Scientology auditing and training as a privilege. But to a Sea Org member, it's a privilege.
Yeah, well, and it's the only path out of your situation. Because even if you fucking route out, you still have to do like an ethics program as part of it. So you have a limited amount of time to cover a certain amount of material. So, so it does create another economic strain because you also then have to walk these other steps.
Right.
So,
and then some, a lot of people ask the question, okay, so you're in what is in some respects a physical, but in most respects a psychological prison. Then if you go on the RPF's RPF, it's like a double psychological penalty. A lot of people ask the question, yeah, but why don't you leave? And I think what you could explain better than anyone is because these people want to continue to be Scientologists at this point.
Right. It takes this level of disruption and more in some cases to get you out of the mindset of that what you're doing is freedom. And that's sort of the disconnect. Scientology equals freedom. It's spiritual freedom. It's physical, whatever, however you define it. So that becomes this appealing ideal that Scientology really tries to make sure it's 100% associated with all the time. So the process of letting go of that psychologically means like, wait, no, I'm enslaving myself to reality. It's hard to let go because it feels like you're giving something up that you've invested a lot of time in it. So there's a lot of other things that back it up, but yeah, you're still wanting it. You still buy into the idea, even if it's, not fully consciously, you still buy into the idea that this is the way out, so to speak.
Schedule wise, we're going to run into a hard stop here. Let's continue this conversation later on and dig into this a little deeper. One question I can imagine people wondering about is your experience on the RPF. If you had been of the frame of mind where you wanted to say, fuck this, I'm done with the RPF, I'm done with the Sea Org, I'm done with Scientology, and you didn't give a shit about the consequences, and you didn't give a shit about having no money or no place to go or anything like that, could you have just walked down the street and never come back if you didn't have all those psychological factors keeping you there?
I will answer it in the best way I know how, which is I only know one person who did that. And that was, he was a guy at Gold. He was from Gold for Pat Gualtieri. He was the only guy that I know of who just sort of like looked around and said, yeah, no, fuck this shit. I'm going to go do something. Because he didn't really have any family in. He had VA benefits that he could collect on. He definitely had some health problems because for a variety of reasons. But when he fucking rolled out, never came back. Like, he went, got himself situated, and is like, no, this is my gig here. So I only know of one person where that happened. The thing is, yeah, you could, but the thing is, I also did that. I left to go visit my mom because she had cancer, and I didn't think I was going to be able to see her again. And you leave, and they will come get you. They will find you. They will. So you have to. Nobody has a game plan for all the conversations that are going to come up because they're going to push every single fucking button. Like the fitness board turn down that I posted. That was in October 2011, or sorry, 2001. I still didn't get off the RPF and out of the Sea Org until March of 2002. And if I fucking left again, then I was going to be cut off from my family. I would get to fucking declare it if I just rolled out again. So, like, even when you lift away the psychological reasons to stay, I mean, my thing was like, I'm not having a good time. This fucking sucks for me. I want to go do something else. After you've lost an eye, that's really hard to argue with. But even still, it's like I lost my eye in January of 2000. After losing my eye, like, Dianetics still had to not work. Like, a full battery of new era Dianetics that I was, that was provided for me by another RPFer who, up until a year ago, I was still actively friends with on Facebook and whatnot, and had maintained a good relationship after we had both gotten out of the Sea Org. But that had to do nothing and not heal anything, and I had to experience the OTs who were on the RPF saying, oh yeah, you're gonna fucking love it when you get to OT3 and you get a real chance to on-ramp onto OT5. Because in their minds, yeah, we're just still gonna handle it with auditing. And
handle what? Did they think your fucking eye was gonna grow back?
They thought that, well, the globe is still there. It's still just very light sensitive and whatnot. But yeah, there's no iris, there's no cornea. The retina is detached and folded up like a taco. It's a medical fucking miracle that retina retained fucking blood supply at all. But I've been, it's now chronically low pressure. I actually have to I have to follow through with everything and get it removed and get a prosthetic.
We were hanging out in LA last month and you had your eye patch off, and I thought your eye looked practically fully normal. I didn't know if it was a glass eye, or I didn't know that was a real eye.
The eye patches for light sensitivity, I can absolutely pass for normal, but that's largely because I kind of have gray eyes, and they're a little bit on the smaller side, and without an iris, but lots of cataracts, the left eye looks gray, and it's just sort of, it passes at a glance. You do have to look at it, but it's a lower pressure and a slightly smaller globe than the right eye.
So these OTs that you're on the RPF with, they're kind of floating out there that once you get onto OT5, you might be able to bring your eye back to full function.
Yeah. And I'm in, at this point, moving, kind of forward and through this with other things happening, like my mom getting cancer and whatnot. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. It's one of those things. The like new era Dianetics, which is like the pinnacle of what's of mind over matter, supposed to fix this. It didn't fucking fix it. And in fact, you know, it's the number of things that this stuff has supposed to have fixed it just hasn't fixed. But also from my experience, at least through a certain end of the auditing and processing, I also know that this is not my fault. I didn't fucking do this. I didn't bring this shit into the world. I don't know why I never 100% bought into the victim blaming aspect of, you know, you are responsible for your own condition. But it did get to a stark point where it's like, okay, that's clearly not true. So once it became clear that there were things that were happening that were legitimately outside of my control and things that shouldn't be under my control, I shouldn't be able to fucking control the world around me with my mind and shit. I shouldn't be so pan-determined that everything happens the way I feel like it should happen. So I was starting to kind of sign off on some of these things where it's like, yeah, okay, so Dianetics is horse shit. I went through the whole fucking thing. Nothing happened. I have no reason to believe. And I mean, maybe I got lucky. Maybe because I watched some fucking Carl Sagan shit in preschool, you know, that some of that stuck. I don't know, you know? So it's one of those things where certain things couldn't be reconciled anymore. I didn't even really get my head out of the Scientologist mindset until like 2006 was when I was like, yeah, I'm never even going to identify with that. And I didn't even come to grips with my own like mental health problems really until more like 5-8 years ago. Yeah, different things happen at different rates, but you know, you can only change your mind from the mindset that you have at the time that you have it. So going from all in true believer, yeah, I had to lose an eye and essentially lose, you know, get threatened continuously with losing my family in order to get out. And then once getting out, they still just sort of cut me off from some of my family.
It's incredible. I say it over and over that the Church of Scientology is the cause of its own demise, probably for the better. But if they just treated people a little bit better, they wouldn't lose anyone. Everyone's already bought in to this thing pretty hardcore. You have to treat people pretty fucking terribly to make them leave. And then it's kind of like, well, you know, at this end of the story of where you and I are now in our lives, it's like, well, great, keep treating people badly because everybody should leave. But it's just still interesting to note that they're doing it to themselves. And you have to try pretty hard to treat people that bad.
I think we're also at this point where there's definitely more of us than there are of them at this point. Of the people that are just, no, that was all bullshit. None of it should have happened. I don't want that to be part of my life anymore. There's more of us than there are of them, I think.
Yeah.
And
to people looking in on all of this from the outside, one of the strangest things to them is how can any organization, why would any organization, how does any organization try to control the lives of its members to this extreme degree? And it's remarkable to look back, you know, hindsight being what it is, and to see how it was never a red flag to me when I was in it, that there was this expectation that the Sea Org members or staff members or policy itself would dictate down to the smallest detail how people were supposed to live their lives, where you're allowed to live, who you're allowed to talk to. Never struck me as a red flag when you're in it. It's very hard to see this shit as weird when you're in it.
Well, yeah, and also because we were raised in it, we don't have a different frame of reference, you know, whereas, you know, my parents at least had a point of reference for a certain amount of normality. They still went along with a lot of control and a lot of poor boundaries.
Yeah. All right, so let's see if we can dig into some more of this at another time.
I got to get back on the road here, but I should have some ideas on when I'll have some good Wi-Fi signal or good access to get in touch with the next.
Yeah, great. Like I'll edit this and upload this. So I won't wait to do a second interview to edit this and upload this, but then we can do like a part 2 sometime whenever it's good for you.
Sounds good.
All right, everybody. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not,